Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today, I'm honoured and delighted to be speaking with baseball coach Rob Cooper. Rob, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Wow, I really appreciate you having me on. Excited to be here and excited to talk a little bit about this.
Well, no, I'm super excited because we've done a few podcasts on the psychology of baseball, but there's plenty more to talk about, and there's plenty more for me to learn because I don't know enough about baseball and the intricacies of the psychological side of baseball. But I think to get us started, Rob, why don't you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience? I know many folk in the US will know of you and your coaching, but the rest of the world would love to know more about Rob Cooper.
Well, I was lucky enough to play college baseball. I played at a junior college in California at Sacramento City College and played for a great mentor there, and Jerry Weinstein, who really opened up my mind and my eyes to the mental game of sports and sports psychology. I went to the University of Miami, where I also got to play and started my coaching career. Graduated with a degree in psychology and started my coaching career. And throughout the years, I've coached at some really great universities here, whether it's been Tulane University, Wake Forest, Miami, Oral Roberts. I was then named head coach at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. And then was lucky enough to become the head coach here at Penn State, and I'm getting ready to start my 7th season here, and also coached with, been lucky enough to be with USA Baseball. So I was the head coach in 2013, where I was lucky enough to coach a bunch of guys that won a gold medal over in Taiwan, and just been very, very blessed as a coach and getting to coach some great players and meet some great people.
That's incredible. And you know where I'd love to start, and I always do this with coaches who've got a strong playing background. Talk to me a little bit about the mental side of your game when you were developing as a baseball player, perhaps when you had your college scholarship there. If you were to give me a mark out of 10 for your mental ability, what would it be? What was strong? What could have improved?
Well, I think like anything else, the older you get, hopefully the wiser you get. And so there's a lot of stuff that I wish I had known really and fully understood it back then. But, to be brutally honest with you, I wasn't a very good player. I was not an athletic, gifted person. So I had to really rely on studying the game. I had to really rely on mental cues and routines and basically, believing in myself and having the confidence to go out and compete. And so, and I think that, obviously you can be really talented and really athletic and a really good player in whatever sport. But if you don't have a strong mental game, it's going to, at some point, it's going to catch up to you as you move up the ranks. Whereas I think you can be an average player, have a strong mental game, and have a chance to compete on a daily basis. And so for me, I don't think I would have had the opportunities as a player that I did had I not really tried to, cultivate that mindset on a daily basis.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Do you think there's a relationship between people who end up successful coaches and perhaps having less ability, in inverted commas, in their sport? What I've found is that that's so often the case, is that people who just didn't necessarily have that natural talent, again, in inverted commas, had to do the kind of things that they now use in their coaching, and they use it to great success.
Yeah, I kind of joke around with people. I was not, because I wasn't a very good player, I heard so many times of what I couldn't do. So I figured if I just said the opposite, I could probably be a pretty good coach. But, I think for me, I kind of looked at it as, and especially now in my coaching, I talk to our guys as the mental game being a weapon for good. And I mean that by, it's something you got to practice. It's something you've got to work on. It's something that you have to, and then as you do it, as you build it up, it's something that you have to really, consider as sacred and protect it. And so, and it's something that you never really fully become, great at, because you're always learning and always, you're always going to be inundated with things. But, I do think that part of that being such an important thing for me as a young player, is really what kind of made me look at, hey, you know what, I'd like to help people with these lessons, and coaching was a natural avenue for it for me, I felt like.
Staying with the early part of your career, after you played, you started coaching. I think you mentioned Wake Forest, you mentioned Miami. So in the early stages of your coaching career, you'd come out of playing, and as you mentioned, you had to strive to get the most out of your ability, and the mental side of the game played a part of it in that. Did the mental side of the game play a big part in the early stages of your coaching career, or did you kind of give away a little bit to the, whether you call it the physical side of the game?
Sure. I think like any young coach, we're so naive that we think that, hey, all I need is a chance to coach some players, and I'll develop everybody and anybody, and I'm just going to X and O everybody. I'm so smart. And obviously what you find out really quickly is that there's a lot of really good coaches, and it's more about the relationships and the way you build trust between players, and because that's that trust and that buy-in, before they got to believe you before they believe anything you say. Well, then from a mental game standpoint, and that's where I keep calling it the mental game, but sports psych, where I look at it is when I was really young, as a coach, I would sit there and go, okay, well, this is what I did as a player, and if everybody's routine, if they didn't do exactly what I did as a player from a mental game standpoint, then they're not doing it right. And or not that they're not doing it right, they just don't care about it as much. And obviously, thankfully, I observed and watched and realized, just like anything else, it's got to be organic to the player. It's got to be organic to the person and what that routine works for them. Because if you try to force somebody into a certain routine or using certain techniques, whether it's to flush, a flush technique or something to get rid of, and it's not organic to them, well, then they're being forced to do something. And you want it to be something that they can go to when they need it the most, in the moment they need it the most.
Interesting. And did that sort of appreciation of individual differences, was that a bolt of lightning? Did that happen gradually over time, that appreciation, or was that a relationship you struck up with a specific sports psychologist or reading books? How did that emerge for you?
I think it's all of it. I think when you and I were talking about Ken Ravizza before we started this, obviously one of the leading sports psychologists of his time, and unfortunately just recently passed away. But, as you watched him, when I first met him and I was, still playing, and then I watched him evolve, and you're sitting there going, okay, this guy is somebody that a lot of people go to and they think he's one of the best, and he's changed a lot of the things he does. And so whether it's been books, whether it's been actual, use as a coach, actually trying to coach it and put it into practice with players and watching what works for some guys and what doesn't work for some guys. And then also just, being around different coaches, different mental game, sports psych coaches that have different ways of teaching it. We're, saying the same thing. A lot of the ideas are similar, but, and like anything else, I think people learn in different ways. Some people learn with different trigger words, or people learn with different ways of seeing stuff. So I would say it's a lot of it, and I think a lot of it's just trial and error and realizing that I think at the end of the day, if you're trying to be the best coach you can be, you have to give up what you think works for you is the most important thing, because that's not it. It's what I got to find what works for that individual on a consistent basis. Your
own template isn't necessarily the best template for somebody else, and I think, as you said, we've spoken off air about Ken Ravizza, and it's somebody who unfortunately I'll never get to meet or to speak to, and that's an enormous regret for me. And I know how how much impact he had on North American sports. I know what a wonderful sports psychologist he is, and his legacy is going to live on. And it's almost akin for me as a young golfer growing up. I think as a 16, 17-year-old, I had a bit of an anarchish compulsion towards sports psychology, and I don't know why, Rob, but I did, and I picked up Dr. Bob Rotella's book.
Yes.
Golf is not a game of perfect, and he was my sort of hero, and still is, I suppose, back then. And he really was the first person in golf anyway to come along and write something in the language of the golfer. I mean, he didn't write about systematic desensitization. He just wrote about staying in the present moment, which was just brilliant. And I'm guessing that was the same experience you had with Ken and his book Heads Up Baseball. I mean, I suppose he broke it down for you so that you were able to understand it better. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, absolutely. The very, very first of all, I'm a huge fan of Bob Rotella and his work. I mean, a definite pioneer in sports psych and sports performance. The first book that I was ever really introduced to was The Inner Game of Tennis. I was in high school. My dad had purchased it and definitely read it, and I enjoyed it. But then the very first book that kind of really made a huge impact on me was The Mental Game of Baseball by Harvey Dorfman, and I love that book. It was the first one that really kind of showed me just how important and impactful this part of the game was. The thing about Ken's for me was I felt like Ken Revisa's book Heads Up Baseball gave you actual techniques, actual exercises, actual examples of, okay, we know that when something happens, it's how you respond to it. Well, here are some ways to actually do that. Here are some ways to, slow things down. And so that's why it really resonated with me as to, okay, this is something that you have to work on. This is something you have to practice. This is something you have to emphasize. It's kind of like so many coaches will say, hey, you got, when a player gets mad, they'll be like, hey, you gotta handle your emotions better. You gotta let it go. Okay, well, let's teach them. Let's teach them how to do that. Because, in baseball, if I'm going to ask them to execute a certain physical skill, well, we're going to spend time teaching it. And if I don't, then I shouldn't expect them to be able to execute it. Well, if I'm going to tell them, hey, let it go, or get over it or move on or whatever, just as a coach, well, how about I teach them some techniques to do that and give them, the capabilities and the power to do it, and then they become their own coach in that regard.
You mentioned Galway, and I had a wry smile because I actually think I read Galway before I read Rotella, and I always remember I actually picked up In a Game of Golf first, as you would do, and In a Game of Tennis was the original and the pioneering one, and I always remember the back hit exercise. I don't know if it can be utilised in baseball. I mean, it was very much to silence. I think it was he talked about self one and self two, and silencing the inner critic, which is self one, and just when you get to the top of your swing, saying back, and when you're actually releasing the club through impact, saying hit, and just focusing on that and letting your natural athletic motion take over. I would imagine you could do something like that in baseball.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of putting yourself on one channel, meaning like I'm not when my thoughts are all over the place and I've got a million things swimming around in my head, to me, when I think of that drill, the back, like I'm focusing on that. So it's as it's a swing thought, like in golf, it's a swing thought, So example of something that we've done in baseball is, when you're hitting ground balls to guys, or guys are struggling with, worrying about a ground ball that might take a bad hop or making an error as the ball's coming, we actually have guys count the hops. So they'll count them out loud or they'll count them to themselves. And it's hard to think about it taking a bad hop when you're just trying to count the hops. So you're putting your focus on something and just letting your athletic ability take over and do it. So I think to me, that's a very similar thing from what he's talking about with the back hit exercise.
Absolutely, and going back to what you said about Ken and the first book to come along that really introduced specific techniques for baseball players to utilise. I think it's really interesting because I think, and I'm not too sure if you agree with me here, but I think historically we've got ourselves into trouble within the coaching profession because we've often said, a player has it or doesn't have it mentally. I think that's where we've been grounded, and I think that those kind of books and lectures by those people, presentations being delivered by those kind of people, maybe change the industry a little bit by saying, well, actually, hang on a minute. Okay, this player may struggle a little bit on this side, but there are tangible techniques and tools for that person to be able to work on these things, and it gives us some hope that this side can be developed.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and I also have seen it, and so I think so much of it is wrapped up into, again, when we look at the athletes that we deal with, for so long, they don't have a ton of failure because they're really good. They're really good as they get older. As they're younger, as they get older, and so they don't go through a ton of failure, like high stress failure, until the talent level starts to become even, and we also, I think, do a really poor job of all of a sudden we take it from, like when I was a kid and I had dreams of being, a world champion in baseball. Like, I promise you, when I visualized myself up at the plate with the game on the line, I never struck out. When I visualized myself doing it, I never struck out. But there comes a point in time where our athletes stop dreaming about that success. Okay, so I think that has to be continued to be cultivated and encouraged. But part of it is that they don't know what they don't know, and you have to sit there with them and explain to them, like, hey, this failure that you're feeling, this means that you're doing something really good. It means you're doing something hard. And if one of the big things that we try to do, Dan, is we try to almost redefine with our athletes here that of what failure is. Like, you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing, because that's when the game is talking to you and it's trying to teach you something, whether it's what you're doing physically is not going to work, what you're doing mentally because you're not slowing things down to give yourself a chance, but there's a lesson in there. And what we try to tell our guys is, hey, look, you attempt something really hard. You're either going to be successful, and then you gain the confidence from it, and then there's another test that comes after it, or you're going to fail. And if you look at it as an opportunity to learn, then neither outcomes are bad. They're just part of the process. And so I think we have to take away what failure is and really redefine for kids, and they just don't know that. They don't realize that because they've never had to do it. That's my feeling on it.
It's really interesting. You're talking a lot about failure there. Now, you're head coach at Penn State University, and I know that you help develop with your coaching staff players who go on and play MLB. They become some of the best baseball players in the world. Question for you, would you prefer to see more players come to you at college level who have experienced failure?
Yes, and it's actually something that we're starting to ask questions on when we recruit guys. So, for example, one of the things when I sit with a family and a young man is, give me an example of something that you failed at or some adversity that you had, and give me an example of how you dealt with it. And, some of them don't have a ton. I mean, again, they've had a lot of success, but when you hear somebody talk about, hey, I lost a relative or I lost a family member and I had to deal with that, and I had to deal with them not being there. And so you listen to how they dealt with it, it gives you a little insight to what, their background is, where they come from, what's important to them, what, and things like that. And I also think that in our society over here that we've done a disservice to a lot of our young people in that we're eliminating failure in so many things that, they haven't had to deal with it. They haven't, when I was a kid, we would get a bunch of guys and we'd just go out and play baseball or football or whatever, or basketball by ourselves. We didn't have anybody organizing it. We didn't have any parents telling us how to do it. So when there was conflict, we resolved it right there. When so you had those skills, and I think so much of it now is set up for them. And it's not their fault. It's not the kid's fault. That's how it is, and that's how it's dealt with. And so you're trying to find guys that actually have dealt with some adversity, or kids that are willing to understand that adversity is not a bad thing.
Listening to you, I'm thinking about the limitations of that talent development pathway. And, over in the UK, there's a psychologist called Professor Dave Collins, who's done some work around this with a couple of other researchers. He produced an insightful and somewhat controversial article piece of research around the notion that talent needs trauma, and trauma being not necessarily big trauma, but also many forms of trauma. Just failure in your own sport, just times when you've been dropped, periods of slumps, if we're going to use that word. Times when technique hasn't stuck and you found it really, really difficult. And it's really interesting listening to you, because I'm thinking about North American sports, and I'm thinking about the difference now. Everything's it's organized sport. Parents have a real influence, and often with respect, often for the worst, because they don't necessarily understand the ideal talent development pathway, and that pay-to-play model whereby coaches need to be showing some form of success at 11, 12, 13 years old, where you're kind of saying, well, hang on, actually I'd rather see a lot of young baseball players fail for periods of time and gain experience of coming through that failure.
Absolutely. I think that, and I did it too, as a young father, not, and I've hopefully have come a long way. And I've got, my oldest son is a freshman on our team, and I've been a baseball player here at Penn State. My youngest son's going to come play baseball here, and so, but I think in so many things, especially over here in the United States, like, when you talk about a baseball player, when someone finds out that they're a baseball player, one of the first things they ask them is, oh, well, how many hits did you get today? Or, how many strikeouts did you have as a pitcher? And, or like over here, like, oh, you play soccer, or how many goals did you score? And so their identity becomes them as a player rather than the process of playing. And so, unfortunately, we're doing that so darn young. And I think this is where a lot of the dreaming goes away, because it's not about, just the getting in there and just playing and the love of playing and learning. Like, again, that failure is part of it. So when I was the head coach of the USA team in 2013, the 18 and under team, we had a young man on the team named Cole Tucker. Well, Cole Tucker is a professional baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He's been in the major leagues, and he has a genuine love for playing the game. Like, he's always smiling. He's always got energy, everything. And I asked him one time, I said, how do you handle the day in and day out grind? And his answer was so authentic and so pure, but he really believes it. He's like, look, I love the joy of playing this game so much that I realize that the hard, the difficult is part of it. The failure is part of it. So I don't get worked up when that happens. I don't, it's not like he accepts it and just is like, oh, I love failing. No, that's not it. He knows it's part of the gig, and so, I think I wish we could get more guys to do that. It's part of it in order for it to be great.
Is that a struggle for you at the college level? You have college players arrive, and as you've alluded to, they're so socialized into performance, high performance. They're so socialized into outcome. And plus, of course, you guys are in the outcome business, aren't you? You're in the high performance business. But there seems to be this paradoxical element whereby they're so socialized into outcome and high performance that there's so much pressure around those, stress around those, and subsequently they can't necessarily handle themselves, but they're so socialized into it, it becomes their identity. Is that something that's a real challenge for you and your staff to be able to help players maneuver through, if you like?
Yeah. So, when a young man woman decides that they're going to go, let's say we're going to take the college model, for example. So, one of our kids, they commit to playing at Penn State, they get a scholarship. So they have now in their mind this script that the rest of their journey is going to follow. And it's not that the journey of there being really tough times is not part of it. Like the script, it's all about success. It's all about what I'm going to accomplish, where I'm going. And that's awesome. But, the truth is that unless, they really realize that in order for me to get to where I want to get, it's going to be hard. I'm going to have setbacks, and that's part of it. And so when they have that struggle and their identity, unfortunately, especially with social media, unfortunately, they look at it and they just see everything that's great on social media. They see friends of theirs that are having the time of their lives, or they're having, because no one really discusses, hey, you know what, I went 0 for 4 today, or I didn't play well today, I had my worst game, and that's just part of it. Everything is rosy and sunny, and the truth is that everybody's struggling it. You're not alone in dealing with that. So it's a very difficult thing. We have a young man on our team right now that had to have arm surgery out of high school, and he had a point this summer, so he's 2 years out of it, and he had a point this summer where he almost quit, and it was just because it had gotten so much about where I used to be and the outcome and where I was supposed to be at this time, and not, hey, just because this isn't written as the script you thought doesn't mean that it's not going somewhere really cool. And I'm happy to say that, I think one of the toughest things a young athlete can do but it's also one of the most empowering things that they can do, is when they take ownership of their, the sports psych, sports performance, the mental game, and understand that their power of choice of how they look at things and how they react to things, then I think they become very, very powerful individuals.
It's really interesting listening to you there, Rob, because it's kind of attuned to a lot of the messages I strive to give to players, is this notion of actually putting mindset first. We're so socialized into, as I've said before, performance and outcome, and maybe we're socialized into the tech tack and the physical sides of the game, but we're not often socialized into the mental side of the game. Listening to you, I hear within your culture that you're striving to push that mental side forward, which I think is interesting. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking, as a sports psychologist, I'm thinking of the work of Carol Dweck. And obviously people think a lot about growth and fixed mindset, but actually the forerunner to that is her papers on meaning systems. And I love what you said there about script. I love that, because that's how human beings function. They really do. The human beings function on a narrative and meaning basis. So every human being has a narrative, an inner narrative about their past, their present, their future. And that's dynamic, it's constantly changing, and they create meaning, and that influences their decision making. And one thing I want to ask you here is that, look, coaches are human beings, right? You're a human being. And I wonder about your wrestle here, because I think this is one of the big challenges, is that on the one hand, you want to push through the mental side of the game. You want to say to players, hey, look, failure is going to happen. On the other side of the coin, hey, you're at Duke University, you want to win games. How do you marry the two? Can you marry the two?
So there's two pieces to this, and one thing I want to just tag on after what we just talked about was, one of the things that we've looked at, and I want to say it's a book called, I'll think of it here in a second, but I was recently reading a book and this over the last year where, and it's something that we started with our players, where we so much of what we do in sports psych is imagery and trying to think in positives, right? Well, I think it's important to also have them have your athletes openly discuss or visualize, okay, so here's something that you're trying to do, a really hard task. You're trying to become one of the best. What is the failure? What is the pushback? What does the adversity look like? What's it feel like? So I almost think you have to have them visualize the hard just as, not just as much, but and weave it into the positive, because then it's not a shock to them when something goes bad. It's like, yeah, you know what, I've talked about this. I was aware about it. So now I can handle it, and it's not new to me. And so, because again, going back to that script, all we think about is, hey, I'm going to go to Penn State University. I'm going to have a great career there. I'm going to sign a professional contract. Everything's going to be great. Well, hopefully that's exactly what happens, but very, very rarely does it. The second part of what you said, I do think you can do both. I really do, but I think it takes, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm perfect at this by any means. I think that, again, you have to be, as a coach, you have to be willing to go, all right, I'm really going to just totally double down on the process. I'm going to totally give in to the process and coaching it and teaching it. And yes, I want to win. Yes, I get judged and critiqued on wins and losses and all that kind of stuff. But when it's all said and done and you're removed from it, and the thing that you'll sit there and go is, okay, if I had to do it all over again, what would I do? Well, every year when we take inventory of our season, or, the great seasons that we've had, I've never sat there and gone, you know what? We had a good season this year because we did that drill where we hit these ground balls there, or we did this physical drill over and over again. We always talked about, you know what, these kids really bought in. They really handled themselves in the moments when it mattered. They were present. That's the stuff. So that's where you gotta double down on. And I think that, the other part of it is for me where I've seen it is, again, I think the young coach being really naive. When somebody would struggle, I'd sit there and I'd go, hey, look, I've taught this to you, let's go. And it was more about how it reflected on me. And now where I get my frustration isn't that they have failure or they don't succeed. It's that it's more of, if I can just get you to realize you can do this and that you ultimately have the power to slow this down, then you have a chance to actually be successful. And so I'll give you an example. Like if you and I went out and we ran a 60-yard dash and we timed it and we got all done with it, we just ran, didn't care about form, didn't care about anything, just ran. All right. And we got all done, and you and I went, and the best speed and agility coach in the world put us through some drills and stuff. There's no question we can get faster and get better and more efficient. But if I tell you to go run a 60-yard dash and then I tell you you're going to run it this time and I'm going to be on your back the whole time, like you're going to have to carry me the whole time. Well, again, we can run it. You can go and run it, not care about form, and not do anything. And then we can go to the world's greatest coach and say, all right, I need to make him faster. Well, if you don't ever let me go, then it doesn't matter what you do physically. It doesn't matter the technique you do. It doesn't matter if you have the best coach in the world, because you're not running free. And that's what so that's why I say for some kids, it's getting them to understand you have to cut the baggage and focus on what you can. And if you can do that, then what you're going to find is your natural ability, your growth is going to take over and allow you to accomplish the things that you're so like when I see kids struggle, it's not because they're not physically talented enough. It's because they won't allow themselves to be great.
I want to ask you a question around what you've just said there. I want to return to the beginning of your narrative there. Obviously, you're getting your players, some of your players, or maybe all of your players, maybe as individuals and maybe as a group, to just reflect on what the challenges behind their goals are going to be. And just it's something that I think one of the most powerful questions I ask players is, what are you going to do if it's going wrong on the pitch? For instance, I do a lot of work in soccer, Rob, and I want clients to picture, envision, visualize, mentally rehearse success, of course, but I do think one of the most powerful things you can ask is, what are you going to do if it goes wrong? And actually that's related to a psychological technique called mental contrasting, which is devised by a German researcher called Gabriel Oettingen. Probably got the surname completely wrong there from a pronunciation perspective, but mental contrasting. So it sounds like you're doing that, which I just think is so important. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we really try to do because, again, I think that so much of this is, again, getting them to understand, getting your athlete to understand that, like, it is going to be hard, and it's part of it. You want it to be hard, otherwise you're not going to accomplish anything great.
Yeah. And
it's, again, like I said earlier, the game is definitely talking to you, or the situation is talking to you, and so it allows, our athletes, if they're willing to look at it, to be honest. But again, so much of what's going on, especially over here with social media, is everything's about image, everything's about perception, everything's about positive, and so I think a lot of what we're dealing with now is trying to get them to understand that, and I don't mean this negatively. Like, I know a lot of people think that, the millennial generation is getting, beaten up a little bit, but, they have so much access to information, really good information. If they get bored with something, they can entertain themselves quickly, so slow, methodical process. That's not a fun thing because they don't have to worry about that constantly. And so when they want answers, when they want information, when they want to be entertained, they can get it quickly. And so it's not that they don't want that. They don't know that that's how it's supposed to be. And I think so much of it is just educating them on that so that you can then, so that they don't feel like, hey, what I'm doing is totally wrong here. Well, no, you're actually doing exactly what you should be doing, and what's happening to you and the way you're feeling, you're not messed up. You haven't failed. You're not a failure. You're being tested.
The second part of your narrative, which you related to freeing up, I think gives us an opportunity to talk about the nitty-gritty of mental skills within, say, baseball. Because I think that lies, in my experience, lies at the heart of mental excellence and excellence within sport. I think that, and listening to you, it sounds like that's your thoughts and approach. I think ultimately sport is about motor behaviour and skill. We want to execute a skill, right? If I'm a golfer, I want to execute my golf swing. If I'm a footballer, soccer player, if you like, I want to execute my kicks. If I'm a baseball player, I want to execute my stroke. Would that be the right word?
Yeah.
Or my pitching action. But the reality is, biologically and psychologically, we have evolved in a manner whereby we're not always performing freely. We can perform with fear or lethargy or doubt or worry or anxiety, and you use that term free. We want players to free up. Now, my point is this. What I find in my practice is almost what lies at the heart of the capacity to execute freely is the acceptance that failure might happen. It's the acceptance that I might perform 6 out of 10. It's the acceptance that I might hit it out of bounds. It's the acceptance that I might hit this into the net. It's the acceptance that I might strike out. It almost feels like the acceptance of failure is the start of the capacity to execute freely.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, again, when you start to think about, what might happen, you're now the focus, whether you're trying to or not, the focus has become about an outcome. Whether the outcome that you're thinking could potentially happen happens, or it's something that, the positive outcome happens.
Yep.
It's still, you've now put the focus on the outcome, rather than your energy and effort into, what's going on. I think the other thing too is, we talk to our guys about being, giving 100% of your 50%. And what that means is so many times when our athletes compete is they just assume that the person they're competing against is at 100%. And they sit there and they go, man, I just don't feel great today. I feel like I got 50%. Well, give me 100% of that. Instead of worrying about what you don't have, instead of putting energy in what you don't have, give me 100% of your 50%. And, Ken Ravizzi used to say all the time, like, he would say it sarcastically, but he would say, are you that bad of a player that you need everything to go perfect for you to do well? And again, it's the reframing, and it's basically like, here's what I can control. Here's what I can't. Here's the percentage I do have. And why focus on what I don't have? I think part of this too is just, so Brene Brown, one of the things that I love that she talks about, the author, is this quote that she has that I saw on Twitter one day. It says, I want to be in the arena. I want to be brave with my life. And when we make the choice to dare greatly, we sign up to get our butts kicked. We can choose courage or we can choose comfort, but we can't have both, not at the same time. And the reason why I think that's so powerful is because I'll give you, we have a young man on our team that has all the talent in the world, and he's starting to really believe that he does, and he's starting to really believe or figure out that it really is about that mindset and about, not what the outcome could be. And he's, he and I were having a conversation. I read that to him, and I said, you want to know what you need to do to figure out, to get to the level that you want to get? And he said, what? And I said, you need to sign up to get your butt kicked, because that's part of it. And guess what? If you sign up to get your butt kicked, you'll probably kick more butt than you have something happen to you. And so I think I just love the way she says it, because I think if you will give yourself, and to me that's giving yourself permission to be great. In order to be great, you got to be willing to fail, but you have to take away what failure is first, like what it means.
I had to smile.
Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I'm going to come back at you, actually, because I'm going to relate this to golf, because I just think it has such similarities to baseball in the stop-start nature of it and the isolated skill aspect of it. But coming back to what you said, I had to smile. You talked about being 100% of 50%, if you like. And actually, I could take our listeners back to episode 2 with Dr. Chris Shambrook, who's a veteran of 5 Olympic Games as a sports psychologist. He was the psychologist for GB rowing, which has one of the best Olympic programs in the world. It's been highly successful, and he uses the same philosophy. If you're going to be 8 out of 10, if you feel 8 out of 10, be 100%. Be 8 out of 8. Essentially. Right. So I just think that's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to be a little bit selfish now, and I'm going to use some of my own ideas, and I want to put a couple of things to you, because again, I want to relate this to golf, because I think it's so important. When we're executing our swing in golf, and we can think about executing our stroke in baseball, I'm at bat there, I'm facing the pitcher, and one of the things I talk about with golfers, and again, this is the idea of freeing them up, is I'll ask them, what does a great swing feel like? What does a great swing feel like? And look, they'll have their swing thoughts and feelings, whether it's something to do with rotation or weight shift or swing plane or whatever. But I'm not bothered about that. That's there, and that's part of what they do. And I'm sure your baseball batters have that as well. They'll have their feel. But I also want to explore feelings of freedom. So I'll ask them, what does a great stroke or swing feel like? And what I might provide for them is some templates here. So I'll say, does it feel confident? Does it feel committed? Does it feel free? Does one of those words make sense to you? Does it feel like that? And they'll go, yeah, it feels committed. And I might ask them to show me a committed swing if they've said committed, or I might ask them to show me a confident swing if the word is confident. And then we'll try and set up a situation whereby their number one job, Rob, is to execute that committed swing. They might still have their swing thought or feeling alongside of that, their technical thought or feeling, but they've got to execute a committed swing. And as long as they've done that, they've done their job. They've done their job. So maybe in your world they might strike out, but did you execute a committed a stroke or swing? Yes, I did. Job done. Now there might be other bits and pieces there, but that is a way I find useful to help golfers, for instance, rationalize a bad shot, a C shot or a D shot, as I might call them.
So I love the way you say, your number one job is to execute a committed swing, because what you're saying on what does it feel like is 100% right. Again, I think if I were to go and ask my players, all right, hey, tell me, coach me on your swing. They could tell me mechanically, physically, this is what I want my swing to do, A to B, this and that. But as we both know, in the moment, you can't think yourself through that. You're going to slow yourself down and you can't do it. And so the truth is before they start really facing consistent high level opponents, their ability is going to allow it to make so they don't have to think. It's just I see the ball, I play, and I go from there. And then when they start facing better opponents with higher stakes, and again, the outcomes are measured differently, that's when you actually need to go back to exactly what you said. You need to understand, what does it feel like? What does it feel like when I'm letting it go? And I'll tell guys all the time, hey, look, that was a great AB. Yeah, your outcome wasn't what you wanted, but I can't control that. Like in our sport especially, I can hit a line drive, like a hard hit ball right at somebody, hit it as good as I possibly can. But once I hit it, I can't steer it. But if I just look at it as I got out, well, then the outcome's bad. I failed. If I just look at it that way. And again, it's more about trying to get them to understand that it's not how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm taking an educated guess here that when you're at bat, if that is the right term, you're perhaps from a psychological perspective here and a perceptual motor perspective, an elite adult player needs to scan the picture, maybe the little subtle movements that might give an indication as to what way the ball's going to move. And then there's the potential to explore the feet. So once you've made a decision about where you think that ball might go, then you can execute your action with confidence or with freedom or with intent or with commitment.
Yeah, and I think it's also very important in baseball for our kids to understand, hey, the guy on the mound, the pitcher that's trying to get you out, you actually need him. In order for you to do something really, really great, you need him to try to compete against you. So if you, again, reframe it in a way where he's part of the solution, then it's not more of, you're taking less emphasis off of, okay, what if I don't do this or what if I don't do that, instead of this is part of it and I need that person out there to help me execute what I want to do.
I think that's fascinating, because when you say that, I'm a big advocate of, and without sounding too funky here, the anxiety isn't in your head. The anxiety resides in what you're looking at. The anxiety is in the picture. So you think of a picture in baseball, and you think about who that person might be, and it might be somebody who's an incredible, well known. That's where you receive. That's where when you experience that anxiety. Whereas, as you're saying there, if you reframe that and you say, "Hey, look, that picture's got to be. It's brilliant that picture's really, really good, fantastic. I can't wait to meet this pitcher. I can't wait to execute my skills with this pitcher there throwing this ball at me."
Correct. And one of the things too, when you're talking about, I think a lot of it, what we're talking about right now, is trying to get them to just be the athlete that they are and not overthink things. I think an exercise that Dr. Olson, our sports psychologist here, had our kids do that I just love, and I've stolen it, is, when you try to get kids to understand the difference between overthinking and just playing. Yeah. And so what he'll have them do, and especially great for our kids, because our kids grow up practicing their autograph because they all think they're going to play in the major leagues, and so he'll have them go, okay, I want you to just sign your name freely and just sign it. And they'll all show it to us. And, it's this big flowery, signature that you'd sign your autograph with. And then he has them do the same thing, but he says, this time I want you to squeeze as hard as you can on the pen, press down as hard as you can, and I want you to really think about signing your name. And it looks completely different. But that's the thing. It's like, hey, you overthought. You thought about how to do this, what it needs to look like. You tried harder. You squeezed more instead of just doing. And I think that's where you try to get the kids to understand that it's you. If you've done the training and you've worked at it, then it's about trusting when you get in the moment.
I love it. I'm going to steal it shamelessly.
Most of the stuff I have, I've stolen.
Well, life is about standing on the shoulders of giants more than anything else. But the last 10 minutes or so here, because this is absolutely fantastic stuff, I just want to talk more about your coaching process with a psychosocial bent. When you sit down and you write either independently or with your other coaches, your session plans, the activities you're going to do, a kind of a session, and please excuse my ignorance because I'm not too sure how this might work in baseball, but what goes through your mind from a psych and social perspective, a psychosocial perspective? What things might you talk about with your coaches when you're planning your practice sessions and training activities?
Well, everything. I mean, and this again is something that it's taken years to really understand. And my job is, and this, everybody's going to say this probably as a head coach, but my job as a head coach, don't get me wrong, I love still coaching guys on the technique and that kind of stuff, but my job is to drive the culture. My job is to, and our culture is built, like I say that the mental game is the backbone of everything we do in our program. Like, I don't want to hire coaches that don't buy into the process. I don't want to hire coaches that don't understand that we're going to fail. I don't want to hire coaches that are going to just, solely focus on the outcome. And it's hard. Like, again, that part's hard because, again, we want to win and you're hired or fired based on wins and losses, but that's the only thing we can control. So when we start planning practice and we talk as coaches, I want us speaking the same language. Our football coach here, James Franklin, has a great thing. He's like, I don't just want our guys on the same page. I want our guys on the same page, reading the same sentence word for word, so that our players understand that we're all on the same page. And so, when we recruit kids, when we coach kids on individual basis, we need to focus on the process. We need to focus on how to connect with guys. Now, that does not mean that when somebody makes a mistake that or fails, that we're just like, hey, yeah, you failed. It's more of, okay, let's take accountability for it. Like, what's the lesson out of it? If someone continues to make the same mistake over and over again, then two things have to happen. One, we have to reevaluate if we're not teaching them correctly and not allowing them to learn it correctly. Or, okay, now we need to really focus on why is it that they're missing it, and are they taking the responsibility necessary to learn from it? So every practice that we plan out, we're all like we sat down today as a staff and planned out our first week of practice since we just started back at school. And so we're talking about things we're going to do with the hitters. Well, there's going to be sections of that where all we work on is what they do in between pitches. What's their routine? I had, before we left for our winter break, I had each player write down their routine before they get up to the plate, what they do in the on-deck circle, what they do pitch to pitch, what happens, what are you going to do when an umpire makes a bad call? Things like that, because I want to be able to understand it and help them in the moment. And so it's not just something we talk about, but it's something that we then have to put into practice. Again, if you just, if you're talking about the sports psych and the mental game as it's important, then you don't reinforce it and you don't make it the backbone of it, then I think it becomes the first thing to let go.
As you're speaking there, the main word that's coming through to me is integration. The integration of psychology, the psychosocial side of the game. As you're speaking, I'm thinking about your leadership style and the importance of integrating psychology within your leadership style, and I'm thinking about that driving teamship, and specifically task cohesion. I think in sport we're very guilty of talking about social cohesion. You know, we took our players rowing or canoeing, or we went and climbed a mountain together, and isn't this great? What great social cohesion! And absolutely, there's a place for that. But when you talk about everybody speaking the same language from the same song sheet, everybody working on what's going on in between, play. They've all got their routines. That's incredible task cohesion there. So, but it starts with integration. You're not allowing anybody into your organisation if they're not going to buy into sports psychology, into the mental side, and aren't going to be a part of the process of integrating this side into the process of coaching.
Yeah, and I actually am very honest with the players too up front. I say to them, listen, I'm not that good as a coach, meaning like I can only go by what I see sometimes. So if I see bad body language, if I see you speeding up, if I see you, with, kind of basically just kind of giving in, well, then I can't read your mind. And so, if I feel, and then on the flip side, if you're struggling, if you're like having a bad day as a player, like outcome wise, striking out, made errors, but your body language is good, your energy is good, then I'm going to also sit there and go, you know what, this kid's competing. He's not, he hasn't given in. He's fighting through this. He's given 100% of that 50%. And so again, it becomes a way for me to really check in and go, and look at it. So I tell them, I'm very honest with them up front and go, you know what? I need you to buy into this because if you don't, then you may be 100% locked in, but I can't read your mind. And, I think it's just another, way for me to connect with them, but also make sure that they're not giving in on themselves, not just on the team, but on themselves.
You're observing motivation, you're observing confidence, you're observing attention, intensity, intent. When you walk out onto the field for a session, what are you looking at? I suppose you kind of just answered that question, actually, and I had that question in my mind, but you're looking at your players, are you also looking at your coaches? Are you looking at interactions between players, interactions between coaches? What was Rob look at when he's walking out there?
So, because we do spend a lot of time talking about preparation, about controllables, because we do arm them with techniques, exercises, thoughts, breathing routines, everything, to be able to handle that, then I can demand a lot more from them when it comes to, how they are going about things. So when I go out on a practice field or in a game and I see somebody who won't give themselves permission to be great, who won't sign up to get their butt kicked because they're worried about the outcome, then that's when I get on them the most. That's when I'm the hardest on them, actually, as opposed to, when, everything else is going, it's not so much the physical outcome or how they do something. It's more about what, how they're going about the competing part.
You're trying to turn down the volume of the emphasis on winning. But when your team does lose, why do they lose? Or why do you think they lose?
So, to me, there are two reasons why you lose. You lose because, you're you play a team that's better than you, and you go out and you compete, and you just get beat, right? I mean, the enemy gets a vote too. So, I think that's a big part of it. But I would say, and I can live with that. any day of the week, I can live with our guys going out. Because, again, going back to the process, did we give ourselves a chance to win? Did we play hard? Did we compete? Did we control the controllables? All that kind of stuff. But, again, when I look at, to me, where games are lost, where people have failure, it's because they let things that they can control, their reaction to stuff, their mindset, this, this guy that I'm facing, he's so good. Well, again, you're not giving yourself any credit, and so it's not allowing yourself to really truly find out how good you can be. And that's the part that, when we talked earlier and you asked me, that for me is the most frustrating part. Because, again, I go back to, if we can get them to give themselves permission to be great, to sign up to get their butts kicked, then they have a chance to really find out how good they are. And that, to me, is the two things. You either play somebody that's good and they just beat you, or you play somebody and you don't give yourself a chance to win. And that's the part that is hard for me, because now it's hard for me because we do spend so much time on it, and we do give them techniques and we do give them ways to deal with it. But unless they'll use them, then it's I have this information, I have these techniques. Like I tell our guys, you got to build a mental game toolbox, and you got to be willing to go get those things when you need them the most.
You got a mental skills toolbox, and you need to use it when you need it the most. Well said, well said. Rob, thank you so much for your time.
No, I appreciate it. I love what you're doing, and this kind of stuff I love talking about, and look forward to hearing more people talk on your show, and just appreciate you letting me come on, and hopefully I didn't bore too many people.
Not at all. It's absolutely fascinating. And one quick question before you go. I know you've got an active Twitter account, so I know people can follow you there. What's your handle, if you don't mind advertising that?
It's at 16 Rob Cooper, and love to learn on. I try to use Twitter for positive, right? I try to learn. I try to connect with people, so. Please, anybody's welcome to reach out, and love to learn more.
Fantastic. Rob, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me exactly what you think of the Sports Psych Show, and if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. Well, I'm already looking forward to next week's episode, and hopefully you'll tune in then. Bye for now.